Hey everyone, ErikOnPaper here, and I'm Erik, and today we're going to look at Spider-Man and the Rhino. The interesting thing about this video is that it's going to be an amalgam of requests that I've received. The main reason being we don't have a completely finalized version of the Rhino design. It's a matter of testing it and the practicality, and I wouldn't want to lead you guys on by saying this is our final design when it might change. So I've also received requests to do a comic book accurate Spider-Man, less influenced by the Raimi movies. So I thought, well, I'll do a comic book accurate Rhino too. And someone suggested in the comics I do the 90s version of the Rhino, and that is completely okay with me because that's the version that I grew up with. Also, in the comments, somebody suggested that the Rhino be chasing Spider-Man, and I thought that that would be a really cool image to draw. Now, the one thing I want to get right here with a drawing like this is the difference in musculature and the size difference, because the Rhino has to appear massive, but Spider-Man, of course, has to be in the foreground. He's the star of the show, and them looking at each other helps draw focus. And the Rhino's muscles have to be massive, like those of a professional bodybuilder, while Spider-Man is much leaner. And at this stage, I'm just going in and kind of roughing in details. So I chose to go with this calligraphy brush pen for the inking to give it more of that Silver Age feel. Now, normally I would use a brush dipped in a kind of India ink, but I wanted to color this in with Copics and colored pencils, and the alcohol would reactivate the ink and cause an ugly gray smear, and we don't really want that. Now, I talked a bit about the Rhino in the storyboarding video that I did, but he's going to be one of our montage villains, one of the villains that Sam Raimi wanted to use but didn't feel was strong enough to support his own movie or own storyline. And I would tend to agree with him, even though I love the Rhino as a character. So also, I consider this to be the first real representation of the Rhino on film because, to be honest, I was not a fan of what they came up with for the ending of The Amazing Spider-Man. I was like, are you kidding me? Now, the funny thing is, normally I draw out the entire figure completely before I ink, but I wasn't happy with his arm position and thankfully did not ink it at the time, so I just went in and drew it later to accommodate the rest of the piece. And now going in with the microns to provide texturing and heavy detail, I really wanted to get the roughness of the Rhino's skin slash suit that he wears down. So in the Spider-Man 4 movie, Rhino is a very formidable opponent for Spider-Man. It's going to be another pretty big action set piece toward the beginning of the movie. And Rhino's going to be flipping cars, he's going to be actually beating the crap out of poor Spidey for a bit, and it'll be one of the early knockdown drag-out fights, and I think it's going to leave the audience exhausted because the key for Spider-Man is that we feel empathy for him. And to feel that empathy, he's going to have to take a wallop from a villain at some point, and who more fitting than the Rhino? Now, what I'm going here as far as art techniques go is sometimes I'll lay on a micron or even use the Copic marker, and if an area is getting really dense with the cross-hatching, I'm going to go in with the calligraphy brush again and just fill it in and make it a complete black solid. And I have learned later to do the webbing on Spider-Man's costume as a final step. It's, to be honest, my least favorite thing about drawing the character, but still, it wouldn't be Spider-Man without it. So yeah, the Rhino costume is going to be about 8 feet tall, I want to say, if you count the very tip of his horn. And it's going to be one of our largest costumes. Oh, going in, just decided to color this, as I mentioned earlier, with Copics. And I start off with a lighter red and then actually fill in a bit with orange. It helps the red stand out pop and give it some life. Otherwise, you're left with, I've noticed, kind of a very medieval looking darker red, really rich, beautiful color, but Spider-Man's a vibrant character, and I like bringing that to life. So now just going in with the blues here, and I tend to use a ton of blue in my work, so those are tending to dry out quick. In fact, I had to make do here, and blend a couple different colors to get the blue that I wanted. And this step is essentially we're dyeing the paper because I want to go in and use colored pencils for a final finishing look and texture, because I love the richness of Copic markers. I love the values that they get, but there's something about the roughness of colored pencils that when I'm doing an action scene or a character like the Rhino, for example, it just gives it more of a life and even more of a painterly feel. And you can see me do this technique in a couple other videos, like the Black Cat and Spider-Man video, or the Lizard. So we'll be filming the Rhino scenes towards the end of principal photography, and it's because, as I mentioned earlier, it's one of our largest costumes that we're constructing for the movie, and we really need to get it right. There I go with the penciling technique. I'm actually using a black pencil, even though you're not technically supposed to, but it gives just such a richness to the shadows. And normally I do some kind of background, but I wanted the figures to really pop out and stand on their own. And here's the finished piece. Well, thank you for watching. I have a Ko-fi account if you'd like to help support me there. Also, please consider liking and subscribing. I'm almost at 400 subscribers, which I'm pretty excited about, so if any of you heroes want to jump aboard, that would be great. Up next in the Spider-Man series is going to be the Battle Damage Spider-Man, followed by some fan art of the Hobgoblin, as well as the PlayStation 4 Spider-Man. So remember to keep telling your stories.